Hi, I'm John Hornick. Welcome to lesson 59 of Chef's Apprentice, Learning to Cook Like a Pro, one small plate at a time. This lesson is beef and salmon Nanbanzuke with split asparagus. This dish may sound Japanese, but it's actually Portuguese in origin and similar to a classic Spanish dish called escabeche. Nanbanzuke is usually made only with fish, but my take is a surf and turf version in which the proteins are marinated before and after cooking. Marinating after cooking is the traditional preparation. You will learn to dredge proteins in flour, pan fry them, and check their doneness. You will also learn to slice and fan asparagus for a nice plating effect. Techniques today are portioning beef and salmon, grating ginger, marinating and seasoning, dredging, bringing to a boil, skimming, blanching, and shocking, keeping warm, pan frying, plating, and finishing. So let's start cooking. All right, let's talk about the mise en place for lesson 59. Of course, we're going to need the stars of this show, which are New York strip steak and salmon. Now, the description calls for a 1-inch strip steak that's been trimmed and cut into 3/4 inch chunks, and about 1 pound of salmon that's been skinned and cut into about 3/4 inch chunks. I'm not making as much tonight. I'm just making actually for one. My wife's out of town, so I'm using less than that. But if you're going to make the small plate for the 8 people, which the description calls for, use the amount called for in the description. I also have the salmon skin here that I took off. I'm going to cook that up for the dogs later on. You need to have about 2 tablespoons of either grated or very finely chopped ginger, about 2 tablespoons of dry sake, about 1/2 cup of rice vinegar. You'll need to have kosher salt and your pepper mill for freshly ground black pepper, about 1.5 tablespoons of sugar, about 1.5 tablespoons of soy sauce. I like Japanese soy sauce, which is known as shoyu, so about 1.5 tablespoons of shoyu. And we'll need a few drops of Asian chili oil. There's a lot of different brands of this. I'm just going to eyeball that when we get to it. We need to have the juice of 1 lemon. We'll need to have some flour or some all-purpose flour or some potato flour or potato starch to dredge the beef and salmon in. So I have some here already in the sizzle plate. Then you'll need to have, for the description, 8 spears of asparagus. Now, depending on what time of the year you get them, they might be really skinny or they might be really thick. It's best if you can get spears that are medium thickness or thick, okay? Because we're going to be slicing them into make a fan, basically. And if the stalk is too thin, it's hard to slice them. It's hard to get a good fan out of them. So you want medium to thicker stalks. And then we'll need to have some Sancho pepper. I think we've used this before. Sancho pepper is a Japanese pepper. It's actually not a pepper. It's a ground berry. And then we'll need some high smoke point oil. I'm going to use avocado oil tonight. That is all of the ingredients. We'll come back and we'll talk about the equipment for lesson 59. One thing I forgot to mention is that the asparagus that's called for in the description should already be blanched, shocked in an ice bath, and then drained and dried. And for the blanching, 4 minutes. I'm not going to be showing you that in the lesson. So when you come to the lesson, you're ready with that blanched asparagus that's already been shocked and drained and dried. Okay, that's all. Back with the equipment. Okay, for equipment, we're going to need a cutting board and a slicing knife. We don't actually need a chef's knife this time unless you decide to chop that ginger. We also need a paring knife. We're going to use that to cut those asparagus later on. We need to have a blanching pot, which is already there on the stove. We need to have a bowl with an ice bath. I haven't blanched those asparagus yet. I'm going to do that closer to finishing a little bit later on. You need to have a microplane if you decide to grate that ginger. A juicer so you can squeeze the juice out of that 1 lemon. Then you'll need to have a bowl, a mixing bowl and a spoon. This will be for mixing up the marinade. Then you'll need to have a Ziploc bag. Now, this is a smaller Ziploc bag. You'll need a larger one, like a 1 gallon size, if you're going to be doing the full amount that's in the description. And then I like to use the Joe Carey bag filler. I think they're great. And then, you know, I always have either a baking pan or a sizzle plate to hold the bag after it's filled with the marinade, just in case it leaks. You need to have a dredging pan with the flour in it. Now, I'm not doing much tonight, so I have just a sizzle plate with the flour in it. If you're doing the full amount, you will need at least, you might be able to, you could use a sizzle plate, but you'll need to have more flour than this. Enough to coat the amount of salmon and beef that you have. Then you will need to have a sizzle plate to put the salmon and the beef on. Later on, you'll see when we'll need that. So I'm going to use the same one. I'm just going to rinse it off, clean it, dry it. You need to have a cooling rack and then something to go underneath. Now you can use paper towels underneath if you want. I don't use many paper towels. I try to keep my carbon footprint a little smaller. So I'll just use a kitchen towel underneath and I'll wash it later. And then we'll need to have a cast iron skillet. We have that there on the stove. We'll need to have another bowl for marinade that we'll be using after the beef and the salmon have been pan fried. And then we will need to have plates to plate up and a spoon to spoon the marinade over the beef and salmon. So that's all the equipment. We'll break and come back and start cooking. Okay, the first thing on our prep list is to mix the marinade. Okay, so we're going to take the ginger and then the sake, the rice vinegar, the sugar, the shoyu, a few drops of the chili oil. You don't need a lot of this. It's very powerful stuff. And then the lemon juice. And mix it up. Well, the next thing to do is to marinate the proteins in a Ziploc bag. And so we're just going to put the salmon and the beef into this Ziploc bag using our bag filler. Add the marinade. Oops, I missed a little bit there. And then we want to close the bag up. Remember, we want to get air out of it. It's not because the air is going to hurt, but because it makes it harder for the marinade to get to the proteins if you have a lot of air in the bag. So push the air out and kind of squish it all around in there a little bit, make sure it's all covered. And I usually then just fold the bag over. So my camera cut out. What I was about to say is that we're just going to put the marinating bag onto the sizzle plate or into your baking pan, and then we're going to put this in the fridge and let it marinate for about 1 hour. All right, the next thing on the prep list is to take these out of the marinade and to dry them. Now, you can use paper towels if you want. I'm going to use a kitchen towel, which will then be washed later. So we're going to just take the pieces out of the marinade, and we want to get them really dry. Now, what I'm going to do is just a moment. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get them dry with this towel, and then I'm going to put them back in the fridge for a little while, uncovered, because the fridge is basically a dehydrator, and it will finish drying them. You can also do that if you are going to be doing this step a little bit earlier than you're doing the cooking. I'm not going to actually cook for probably another hour or so. Oh, and keep your marinade, okay? We're going to get to that in a later step. All right, so we just want to dry these off. Give them a good pat. Get them nice and dry. Okay, now I'm going to dry my hand there a little bit, and then I'm going to put them back onto the dry sizzle plate, and then I'm just going to put those into the fridge until I am ready for the next step. That'll make sure that they're nice and dry. And now we want to take the marinade, pour it into a small saucepan. I may not have mentioned the small saucepan when we were doing the equipment. Sorry about that. And we want to turn on the heat, and we're going to bring this to a boil. Why are we doing that? Because the raw beef and the raw salmon were in there. We're going to be using this marinade later on in the finishing step to serve with the dish. So we want to bring it to a boil, and then we'll reduce the heat, simmer it for just a minute or two, and then take it off the heat, so that we'll be able to use it again later in the lesson. Okay, our marinade is coming to a boil. Let's turn it down to low. Just let that simmer for 1 or 2 minutes and then take it off the stove, turn off the heat, let it cool to room temperature, just hold it until the finishing step. Now if there's any debris that's formed or scum that's formed on the top of this marinade at this step, you want to skim that off. I don't really have any, so we're fine with that, but if you have any, you want to skim that off at this point. Okay, now we're going to split the asparagus. And you're about to see why it's important that we have stalks that are medium thickness or thicker. We're going to start about 1 inch from the end, and we're over closer to the edge here, not in the center. And we're going to run our paring knife down the stalk very evenly with the edge. And when we get to the tip, we're going to go very carefully through the tip. Then we're going to do that again on the other side of the stalk, parallel to the cut that we just made. We want to make sure we stay parallel and we don't cut into what we've already done. Carefully through the tip, and then there we go. Nice asparagus fan. You're going to do that for 8 asparagus if you're serving 8 people. And you want to keep these warm until you're ready to serve. Okay, our beef and our salmon is nice and dry. We're now going to sprinkle them with a little bit of salt and freshly ground black pepper. Okay, now I want to dredge them in the flour. So what we're going to do is just get them well coated, and we're going to put them back onto a clean, dry sizzle plate. Okay, here we go. They're well coated in the flour, and as you might have noticed, I'm keeping them separated. I don't want them to touch because any residual moisture could cause them to stick or to pull the flour off of the one that it's touching. All right, so now we're going to go to the next step. Okay, now we're going to pan fry our salmon and our beef. So put in some high smoke point oil. Could be canola, could be peanut, could be grapeseed. I'm using avocado, or I call it avo oil. And we're going to let that get hot just till we get some whiffs of smoke. Okay, it looks like our oil's hot, but I want to make sure that the bottom of the pan is covered. We don't want any dry spots. Okay, then let's put the salmon and the beef into the pan. We're going to need about 1 to 2 minutes for the salmon, and about probably 2 minutes for the beef. I'm going to do them in batches so we don't lower the temperature of the oil too much. Now I can see that my oil is hotter over here because I've got more of a brown on there, so I'm just going to move some of these babies around. So we get some more of the get more of them into the hot part of the oil, hotter part of the oil. Okay, these are looking beautiful. I'm taking them out. I'm putting them onto a clean sizzle plate. Now I want to add the beef. See, I'm swirling them around a little bit to make sure they get coated with oil. Now those salmon pieces, I'm going to put those on the drying rack. I'm sorry, on the what do you call it? Now those pieces of salmon, I'm going to put them on the cooling rack. What I want to do is let them Just going to put them onto this rack with some with the towel underneath, because I want any oil to drip off onto the towel. Okay, these are looking beautiful too. I'm going to take them off, put them onto the cooling rack. Turn off our heat and remove this pan from the heat. Okay, so these rested for about 5 minutes. We're going to see if they're done. Now, we could use the slice and check method, but if we just kind of bend the salmon a little bit, we can see that it's medium rare inside, so they're perfect. And then with the beef, let's just slice into one and see. Oh yeah, that's nice and rare inside. Now, if they weren't cooked enough, you could put them back on and cook them a little bit more. But see, they're cooked just fine. So now what we want to do is we want to marinate them in that marinade that we brought to a boil earlier. Now, I'm going to say to marinate for at least 15 minutes. I've seen plenty of escabeche and Nanbanzuke recipes that have suggested that you marinate for at least 5 minutes or overnight, because the longer you let it marinate, the better it's going to taste. So what I'm going to do is let these marinate for about 15 minutes, because I'm not going to wait overnight, and I'm going to just toss them every few minutes so that they get nice and coated. And so we'll be back in about 15 minutes. Okay, now it's time to plate up. And what we're going to do is we're going to take one asparagus fan for each guest, and then put down a couple of pieces of the salmon and a couple of pieces of the beef on either side of the asparagus fan. Now we want to spoon a little bit of marinade on top of the beef and the salmon. And then we just want to sprinkle it with a little bit of Sancho pepper on the asparagus spear too. There we go. All right, that's the conclusion of lesson 59, beef and salmon Nanbanzuke with split asparagus. You can see photos of the final dish on my Instagram, which is @ChefsApprentice Cook Like a Pro. Please remember to subscribe to my channel, and thanks for watching.